Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the legal and government correspondent, and I have two guests this week. They're both from the St. Croix County Planning and Zoning Office, Brett Boudreau and John Hilgers. And gentlemen, you have titles here, but since I don't know what those titles necessarily mean, we'll start with you, John. You're a senior planner with St. Croix County.
Yes.
So what does that mean?
Yep, well, my senior planner position allows me to review a number of different projects going on in our office. My primary responsibilities are updating our future comprehensive plan, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. I also manage park planning projects like the Eckert Bluffland Master Park Plan that was recently adopted. I also work on regulatory documents like the zoning ordinance update, the land division update that we're currently working on. I also write grants for the county. We also was able to obtain a couple of grants for park and trail development, along with some Glen Hills Park improvements. And then I also work on citizen surveys through the University of Wisconsin River Falls. These are random, unbiased surveys to gauge people's opinions on different projects, and we're doing one for our comp plan update.
Okay, and your title with the senior in it, what does that mean? How long have you been doing this?
I think it's based mainly on experience, but I've been doing this for about 33 years.
All with St. Croix County, or?
No, I worked as a planning director for the city of Waconia in the southwest Twin City area for 25 years. After that, I worked for the city and county of Broomfield, Colorado, a suburb of Denver, for 4 years as their planning director. Then I came back to the Midwest and have been working with St. Croix County since 2017.
All right, very good. So 5 years. And now how about you, Brett? How long have you been with St. Croix County, and what do you do as a planning and land information administrator?
Sure. I've been with the county since the spring of 2001, so 21 years. Planning and Land Information Administrator. It's a mouthful for the title, but got John and other staff, and we work together as a team to complete all those planning projects that John just talked about, the comprehensive plan, our zoning ordinances. We recently completed general zoning. We've updated our floodplain zoning ordinance. The next ordinance in line is our land division ordinance. Other duties that I have at the county work with the real property listers office, and they work with the local assessors in the local communities for tax and assessment administration, and then also work with our GIS, Geographic Information Systems, our mapping facilities throughout the county. Previous to St. Croix County, I worked for Ramsey County, Minnesota, in St. Paul for 8 years doing GIS there, and before that I was a local land surveyor for S&M Land Surveying here throughout St. Croix County. So I got an opportunity to familiarize myself with the geography and some of the local planning issues.
All right, very good. Well, even though both of you have been around a while, a couple decades, it's still not as long as zoning's been around, because, and I remember when that was a new topic and the Department of Natural Resources was just getting started. Zoning's been around roughly 50 years, and it comes down to land use planning. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. The land use planning needs to inform that zoning.
Right. And so there's different layers of zoning, and you had mentioned off camera that the county does the zoning for most of the townships. Obviously the villages and the cities have their own zoning, but townships can opt not to do their own because it's a very intensive, labor-intensive effort, and so they can default to the county. Is that right?
Correct. So currently in St. Croix County, of the 21 towns, 17 are under county zoning. So we administer the code for the towns, we oversee the code and process applications. The other 4 towns that are not under county zoning, they all have their own zoning ordinance that they enforce, and those would be the towns of Forest, towns of Hudson, St. Joseph, and Troy.
Right. So the 3 townships in our school district, so,
yeah.
and then town of Forest, all right. So now we're here to talk about the comprehensive plan. And what is a comprehensive plan, and how does it relate to zoning overall?
Sure. So the comprehensive plan's the guiding document for the physical growth and change of the county for the next 20 years. So our current comprehensive plan, it goes from 2012 to 2035. That's its title. We first adopted it in 2012. This is an update to that. And we will use it to work on land use, what we want the county to look like in the future is the primary purpose. And it covers a variety of topics: land use, natural resources, agriculture, transportation. We work with the local communities on all of those elements to develop goals and policies and hopefully implement those as we go forward to collectively get the community that we all want.
Okay. And so that comprehensive plan, you mentioned it started in 2012. There was a predecessor to that. What was that called?
Yeah, that was the Development Management Plan. That was adopted in 2000 under some different statutes at the state. As soon as we adopted that, the state adopted some different statutes, which then is why we now call it a comprehensive plan. And through that process, there are certain chapters or elements that are required. But the county's had a comprehensive plan or development management plan since 2000.
Okay. And so the comprehensive plan is separate from the zoning ordinances, but the two are intended to kind of drive each other, right?
Mm-hmm. Work together.
Work together.
Yes. Yep. So the comprehensive plan is purely an advisory document, and it helps guide decisions for local policymakers. So as a good example, when we look at our rezoning applications, when somebody wants to rezone their property, say from residential to commercial, we need to base that decision on some sound, review and process. And so we go back to our comprehensive plan, and one of the chapters in the comprehensive plan is a future land use document. And that land use document allows the jurisdiction to predict or forecast where certain land use features should go in conjunction and harmony with transportation and things like that. So when we do a rezoning application, we review it and process it. We look to what the future land use plan says. And if the land use plan supports the rezoning application, we'll recommend approval in most cases. So even though the future land use plan is not regulatory, it advises to help make decisions on zoning, which is the law. Zoning is the regulatory document.
And this comprehensive plan, like, what kind of how thick of a document is that? How big?
Well, that can depend. Typically, the comprehensive plan will consist of 9 chapters. Brett touched on a few of them, but they range from land use and transportation to agricultural and natural resources, economic development, housing, and things of that nature. Recreation, natural, and park facilities. And so I would say, I think our current plan is maybe 150 to 200 pages.
There's a large amount of background information that's required to be part of comprehensive plan. So we do a really intensive inventory of existing conditions, and those existing conditions through our public input, we try to develop how we want it to be in the future. So there's a large amount of background data that's in the plan, and makes it quite large. So we try to create an executive summary or a smaller document that really gets to the meat of what we're trying to achieve.
Understood. Yeah, it's kind of like the statutes. The zoning statutes used to be able to fit in one volume, and now they've grown, and you have to really hone in on that, or get an executive summary, if you will.
Right. I would like to add one thing about how the future land use and zoning work. It's kind of a means to which a county or a community can use to balance the interests of all the parties. We've got a couple of rezoning examples that have occurred in the last few years, or even make one up. A non-metallic mine. We need gravel to build our subdivisions, but I don't want a gravel pit next to my house. How do we balance those two things?
Well, that's what we end up having is it's a balancing of rights, and because there are some people that see zoning as an impingement on their freedom of what to do with their land, but at the same time they're there to protect you necessarily from neighbors who might not have
Right.
your best interests in mind. And so, you know, it's again, it's a form of government, but at the end, we the people are the government, but it requires you folks, you planners, to work with multiple layers. It's Department of Transportation, Department of Agriculture, the DNR, so a lot of areas. Now, talk about the fact that it's being updated now. I mean, I know it's a process, but it sounds like it's pretty necessary. I mean, we were talking off camera about the changes to St. Croix County just since I've been here, which is 1990, now in our fourth decade here. But incredible growth, and sometimes missing the mark and sometimes exceeding the mark on growth, contrary to some counties in Wisconsin, which have been pretty static over the last 40 years, if not losing population, and not a lot of challenges to the use of land. It's pretty much ag and nothing else. But St. Croix County, being very close to a large urban area, a little bit different than some of our interior counties. So you want to take that?
Yep. So to maybe help explain some of that, I'm going to refer to the population graphic illustration that maybe perhaps we can put up on the screen. But really, you know, St. Croix County is one of the faster growing counties in the state. And, you know, right now we have a population of about 95,000 people, which has grown quite a bit since the 60s and 70s. By the year 2040, we're projected to have about 120,000 people in the county. That includes the towns, the villages, and the cities. And so there are a lot of questions we need to ask ourselves as staff people and as policymakers and as residents. Basically, it's where and what type of growth should occur and where. How can we best protect our natural resources and ag resources? And then what kind of impacts would that growth have on the environment? Those are some things that we need to get some feedback on from our residents. And then transportation improvements. How do we make the improvements? Where do we make those improvements? How do we prioritize the funding dollars? It's not just the county, we have local units of government as well as the DOT and the interstate system that goes through St. Croix County. And then also what I want to touch on real quickly is the changing demographics. So if you look at the chart, you'll see that from 1960 to 2010, the county saw some very consistent growth. You can see by the bar charts. We went from 29,000 in 1960 to about 84,000 in 2010. And the decade between 2000 and 2010 saw the most increase as a percentage of growth. We grew by 33% as a county. Things began to level off a bit after the Great Recession of 2007. You'll see that the growth rate between 2010 and 2020 slowed down quite a bit, a growth rate of 10% compared to the prior decade. But then as you look ahead to our projections, we begin to see a leveling off of the population. We'll see about a 111,000 population estimate by 2030, and by 2040 that becomes 119,000. And so there are a number of philosophies behind the population leveling off. We did learn a lot from the state demographer in terms of trends and what's going to be happening. And so if you look at the numbers, growth is dictated by primarily three different factors: death rate, birth rate, and in-migration, or out-migration if you're losing population. So in the county's case, what we've learned, and this will be true across the country, is that the baby boomers is one of the larger age cohorts in our country. They were people born between 1946 and 1964. So by the year 2026, that age cohort will be turning 80 years old. And so as they move up the age ladder, we're going to be seeing slightly higher death rates as those ages continue to move on. In conjunction with that, we're going to start to see lower birth rates. So we'll still see increase in natural births, but they're going to be coming slower based on the population projections that we're seeing from the state. And then when you look at in-migration, a lot of that's going to have to do with the Twin City area. What we're learning is that some of our western townships and cities that abut the St. Croix River in the Twin City metro area, we're seeing 30 to 35% of the workforce commuting into the Twin Cities. Now, clearly we still have our growth centers like the cities New Richmond and the city of Hudson and the city of River Falls. And they'll be providing some limited industrial and commercial growth, but by and large, a large segment of our population works in the Twin Cities. So depending on the economy, what kind of growth the Twin Cities sees, I think will somewhat dictate what happens in some of the western counties. And so as you see the leveling off of the population, there are a number of factors that are going to be looked at. But the death rate, the birth rate slowing down, the people per household, we're going to start to see declines in that. So those factors are attributable to the leveling off of the population numbers that we see. And then as a county and other jurisdictions, we need to ask ourselves, how does that change the priority in spending? You know, does that going to impact health and human service, sheriff, transportation? Does the aging population maybe have more of an emphasis on the programs we have for seniors? So those are all questions that the comp plan will lay out and pose based on some of the data that we're collecting.
Okay.
Another interesting piece to that is the transition. So we do have another map or graphic that we can provide that shows the change in population from 2010 to 2020. And you can see that we actually have a tier of towns in the county that actually lost or stayed the same in population. So the growth is not consistent across the entire county.
That would be kind of north and east of New Richmond.
North and east of New Richmond. Now it has to do with some of their location. Obviously they're farther out, and then a little bit to do with some of their land regulation and priority of agriculture. And then this chart also has some center of population going back from 1940 to current 2020. And it's a known thing, but it just shows how the center of population of St. Croix County has shifted to the west.
Yep, definitely shift to the west and slightly to the south.
Slightly to the south, yeah.
But, yeah, and you know, there was a lot of talk about the bridge, you know, up by Holton, you know, connecting Stillwater to Wisconsin, and their thought was that there was going to be this huge population surge. But again, we're talking about land use planning and zoning, and that basically is king when it comes to impacting what happens there. And so if St. Joseph Township is maintaining its lower density parcels, then there's not going to be necessarily that huge influx of people right there at the bridge. I think we saw bigger growth maybe in the city of New Richmond from that.
Yeah, this village of Somerset, city of New Richmond, I think are growing at a little bit higher rate with their subdivisions and higher density development.
Okay. So now, and again, while some of these decisions, you look at what's happened in the past, you're trying to project out based on what the Department of Administration is projecting for the next 10 or 20 years.
Right.
So, so what aspects of the comprehensive plan, you told me before you're not just rewriting the whole thing, what do you tend to focus on then, and what kind of comments are you looking for? How can people have input? So I guess first, what are you looking at to change, and then we'll talk about the how later.
Sure. So specifically of the chapters we're going to be spending more time on with this update, we're going to be focusing on land use, transportation, farmland preservation, and natural resources. Those are the 4 chapters that impact growth the most. So as part of our process, we've begun an outreach process. It's more of a way to introduce the project itself, the update project, to the public. We're also identifying a number of ways in which we can collect public input. I mean, there may be issues out there that we may not be, you know, cognizant of that might be happening in certain parts of the county that we need to know about. Obviously, the county is very diverse. We have the agriculture on the east side. More on the west side, we have some of the urbanizing areas that are closer to the Twin Cities. So as part of that, you know, we're working with the public. We've conducted 2 public open houses in early December to invite the public to introduce the project. We've instituted a couple of surveys. Right now we have one on our website that's currently active. It's a project webpage that allows people to access the website and fill out a survey that touches on the chapters I just mentioned to introduce the topic and get some initial feedback. We also did a random unbiased survey with University of Wisconsin River Falls with some statistical accuracy that we're hoping for on answers to some of the questions that we're seeking relating to those chapters. We're also going to be hosting some future open houses as we start putting the data together and we have some recommendations or at least some things we can put out there for people to react to. We'll be having some more open houses probably in spring or summer, and then we'll be constantly updating our webpage as we put information together. And then in all of this, our towns, villages, and cities are important partners in this. They're all part of the county, so we need to make sure that we involve them, forward updates to them, and keep them apprised of what we're working on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We've done that random sample survey with UW River Falls Survey Research Center. We did it before the 2012 comprehensive plan. We did it previous to that in 2000. So we have that as a series of surveys with similar questions that we can go back to see if any attitudes or desires have changed across the county residents as well.
And I was going to ask, because notice, looking at this, there was a bit of a fall of the population projection growth. Yep. I mean, obviously, numbers-wise, we had in 1990 a 7,000 increase, then 13,000 in 2000, then 21,000, so it was going up about 7,000. Then it fell down to 9,100 between 2010 and 2020. And of course, a lot of that had to do with the Great Recession and the impacts that were felt for years later. But given that your comprehensive plan was started in 2012, like what were the surprises, so to speak, with regard to, you were anticipating greater growth than what we had. So were the policies, are those going to change now that we're going to see a bigger uptick in percentage of growth for the next decade, or at least projected to?
Well, I think those are some of the questions that we need to determine through our public input processes, our feedback from the town, when we take some of our survey results back to the Community Development Committee and to get their input and feedback. So we'll see where those results lead to, and as far as shaping some of our goals and policies.
And what have you seen has been the biggest benefits from the comprehensive plan of 2012 as we sit here now in 2022?
Using it for those land use decisions, the rezonings that come through our office that John manages and works with. It's been a big help. It provides consistency in the decision-making process, releases you from that arbitrary, I like you, I don't like him type of thing.
Right, yeah, and there are some people that thought that there was a little bit of a, for lack of a better word, good old boys network. If you know somebody on the town board, don't worry, you'll be able to get this through. The comprehensive plan's trying to ameliorate that effect a little bit.
Even that out, yes.
Yeah. If I can just add one more thing real quick to that 2012 comprehensive plan update, it really set the stage for the county to adopt what we call farmland preservation plan zoning. And I'm going to show up a graphic about the farmland preservation plan. Okay. And basically the 2012 comp plan update set the stage for the county to adopt what we call farmland preservation plan zoning. So that allowed the county to rate and score different properties based on their agricultural value. And as you see from the graphic, a lot of those properties are located in the center and eastern part of the counties.
Not much in my school district, where
not
Hudson
much,
and St. Joe and Troy.
Because some of the ratings are based on proximity to major subdivisions, how much of the property is being farmed already, what are the adjacent land uses, the soil types. So if you score high enough, you qualify for farmland preservation plan mapping. And once you're qualified, the areas in green are then eligible for what we call ag zoning, which is 2 different agricultural zoning districts. It's either Ag 1 or Ag 2. The only difference is Ag 1, you're allowed 1 unit per 40 acres of density. And Ag 2 is the 2 unit per 40 acres. And the limited density is to promote agriculture. We don't want major subdivisions in those areas. It's prime farming. It's mapped as such. It's been scored as such. the incentives to participate in that program then allows the farmers to apply for state income tax credits. And so once they qualify for the ag zoning and they qualify for that designation, they can apply for income tax credits. So that is kind of the incentive for that.
Well, and that's to try and reduce the economic impact of, farming. Not a super profitable. That's why we've seen a lot fewer family farms, more commercial farms. But we're at a risk of losing farmland to development just because of the dollars and cents. They can make more money by selling it to a developer than they can keeping it in agriculture. So that's the policy, public policy behind the tax credits, right?
Yes, and that it's one tool in which to preserve the prime agricultural farming areas of the county. And of these areas, the town has to certify or agree to participate in that program. And so the towns you see with the purple hatches through the town's names, Stanton, Ceylon, Erin Prairie, Baldwin, Pleasant Valley, and Rush River, are all participants in that program. So their property owners do get the benefit of those income tax credits should they choose to participate.
And they get that support because they have town boards that are in favor of it.
Yes.
But hopefully those town boards are listening to the people, and the people are saying, we moved here for a reason. We want to be around a rural area. We don't want to be, have half-acre lots or
Yep.
more or higher density. We want to be able to preserve that farmland and be in the country. So there's that kind of the thinking there with
Yep.
those counties.
And you'll see in the towns that are under that farmland preservation plan designation, they are very supportive of agriculture. They are very, very adamant about keeping agriculture as the primary way of life in those areas.
Yeah. I would also comment on that map that Hudson, St. Joe, Richmond, Somerset, and Star Prairie, while they may not be green and qualifying for the Farmland Preservation Plan, much of that land is still in agriculture. It's just that due to its location and what some of their land use policies said, it may not be in agriculture in 10 or 15 years. So then the state would say that we don't want to provide those tax breaks or those incentives to something that could switch over to residential.
Right, and we're looking at areas that are adjacent to higher density
exactly.
population centers. And that's kind of the goal, because you don't want commercial activity just popping up in the middle of agricultural areas. So those are the advantages. What are some of the challenges you're finding with this planning process or planning update, if you will?
The challenges are getting the word out to the folks that you have an opportunity to participate in this process, whether it's through these open houses, through this online survey. There's going to be future opportunities with other online surveys. We're going to have other open house opportunities. We are trying to reinvent that, after the pandemic, or just even moving forward. People are more to be online and interactive that way. So we need to, I think, change with that as well.
But part of that challenge, isn't it kind of a silver lining in that it's kind of a sign that folks are happy with the planning that has been happening so far?
We've been telling ourselves that.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the thing, is when folks are there with the torches and the pitchforks at the door of whatever, whether it's a school board or a town board, it's usually because they're upset with the way things are going. And when you're having challenges trying to get people involved in a planning process, it's many times is kind of a tacit or implicit sign that maybe things are going well, but it still leaves a lot of uncertainty. Do they want to continue that, or is there any changes? Do they want to make it stronger, weaker, and so forth? Do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that the University of Wisconsin River Falls survey is kind of a way to engage people in an unbiased way. The random sample allows people to comment without any perceived biases, and from that we want to use that as the base to kind of gauge, hey, what is the feeling of residents on certain issues? So unfortunately we won't have the results of that survey until the end of January. So we're still very early in the process.
Okay.
But as we start collecting some of that data, it's going to give us at least some initial guidance on what some of the issues might be out there.
But these are decisions that people do talk about, they care about deeply, about how close their neighbors are to them, whether there can be, continue to be farmland and zones related to for parks and natural resources and such. So how can our viewers here that are watching this segment get their input into this process?
Well, we have a number of mechanisms. We do have a project web page that's established. We can provide that to you.
Is that on the county website?
Yep.
It is, and it's basically sccwi.gov/comprehensive/plan.
Dash plan.
Yes.
Okay, comprehensive plan. But
Yep.
so if they go to the county website and then specifically look for comprehensive plan, they should be able to find it.
And then there'll be a number of links on that page, the open access survey. And that open access survey, even though it's a number of specific questions, we do leave open-ended questions. So if there's something on the survey that isn't addressed, they can certainly add to that under the open dialogue box. So we're hopeful that through that process, I think we'll get some good feedback.
Well, you mentioned transportation. I mean, a lot of this has been land use and agriculture and so forth, but some of the future is, linking up these communities with bike trails. So where does that fall in this? And will they find that on that open survey?
I believe there's a couple questions about the facility types, not so much about the location. We do have a comprehensive bicycle plan that the county adopted in 2017. Many of the local municipalities also have a bicycle plan. So we are still following and working to implement that plan and make those connections.
Okay. And now, any other comments on some of the feedback that you've received thus far? I know it's still early in the process, but
Yeah, so we've had this open access survey available since I believe mid to late November, so even that's pretty early. We did look at some initial feedback we're getting through our data portal, and there's a strong emphasis to continue to preserve our natural resources and our agricultural resources. That's coming up quite clearly. So that's one thing that we've noticed in some of the responses. And then through some of our open houses, kind of the same thing. People want to preserve the natural resources. And people are concerned about the conversion of ag land to development. We've seen that come out in the survey as well. So those are things we'll have to review and analyze as we get further in.
And you mentioned natural resources. I mean, one of the most key, it's really important in other parts of the country, but drinking water, right? I mean, it's one thing to have access to water, which we've got plenty of access to water in this county. It's just preserving that clean drinking water, and that's one of the primary areas where the zoning office is, all about permitting our septic systems and so forth. So you don't see that changing dramatically with the next comprehensive plan?
I believe we're going to address it more in this comprehensive plan because of the concern. I mean, 100% of our drinking water in the county comes from groundwater. There's no other source for our drinking water. That's where it comes from. 50% of the population is on municipal systems. Another 50% is on their own private well. So when you have that many private well managers, we need to promote testing and awareness. We have a high level of wells with nitrates that are over the drinking water limit. I believe about 12% of our wells are testing high.
That's another graphic that our
nitrates.
producer can throw up on the screen.
I believe we have that.
I didn't print that one, but I was trying to figure out whether you got a sample from my well because there was a blue and there was a gray right next to each other. Why do we see that? Where there's low levels of nitrates and then adjacent water source could be high level.
Well construction, the depth of well is one factor. All wells are not created equal. An older well versus a
Just
new
no matter
well.
how deep you have to go. Right?
And then that's part of it, but then a greater part is our karst topography, as we call it. So that limestone and bedrock that underlays all of our soils, it can have cracks and fissures in it. And generally our groundwater in the county goes from the northeast to the southwest.
Okay.
Same way as our overland drainage, towards the St. Croix. So generally it flows that way. However, these cracks or fissures could potentially, send it somewhere else and send it quite quickly.
Okay.
So that's potentially what can
Right.
happen when you have wells
So
that are close together.
you may think that you're upstream from the dangerous levels, but it
Right.
might not necessarily mean that way underground. Okay.
I think generally it does, but those cracks and fissures can, accelerate things.
All right. So we've got the website for the county. Any other message that you wanted to get out? Because I know that you're really looking to get people's input on this, and they may have a lot to say about only one or two subjects,
Right.
but that's okay, right?
Yep. We have an identified public participation plan which lays out the steps and processes that we're going to pursue to get public feedback. And this is about a 15-month project. So we're looking at finishing this project in about March of 2024. So as we go along the way, we're going to have steps where we're going to report back to our committee, but those will also be opportunities for the public to weigh in. As we mentioned earlier, we will be providing updates on the webpage. As we begin to draft some of the policies for our committees to consider, we're also going to have the public view those and weigh in at different stages of the plan update.
Well, very good. Well, maybe we'll have you gentlemen back
All right.
here in 6 to 9 months, so when we're about halfway through the project.
Sure.
And see how it's going and where else we can get our viewers to help you out.
Yes, and
Great,
we'll have more
thank
to
you.
report by then. We'll
Yeah.
have more survey results and things we can share.
All right, excellent.
Very good.
Well, I want to thank you for
Right,
coming on the
thank you.
show.
Thank you.
And for your
Thank
time
you.
and for your efforts, making this, a great county to live in. And we just know we're going to have a lot more folks
Yeah.
that will be able
Yes.
to call neighbors here in this county in the next decade. And we want to make sure that there's plenty to go around for everyone as far as enjoyment of natural resources and transporting folks and et cetera. So thank you for your time. And I want to thank our viewers for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson. Keep watching.